All right, welcome back, everyone. We are about to have an exciting conversation. I'm joined by Cristina Jiménez, who is the co-founder and executive director of United We Dream, which is a network of organizations focused on addressing the needs of immigrant youth and families. And I'm joined by Desmond Meade, who's the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition and chair of Floridians for a Fair Democracy. So I'm going to dive right in and ask each of you to talk about the work that you're doing, but in particular to talk about how your own lived experiences have influenced the work that you're doing today. So Cristina, why don't we start with you?
Sure, and great to be here. So thank you, Robin Hood, for bringing us all together, and great to be with the Swans and you, John, for this conversation. Everything that I do, and even how I ended up leading United We Dream and being part of a group of young people that co-founded the organization in 2008, came from a lived experience of being an immigrant that actually just grew up across the river here in the city in Queens. My family and I, like many immigrants, came to this country seeking a better life. We were fleeing poverty, and my parents always had a dream that we could go to school, get an education. And growing up here very quickly, I realized we as a family who was immigrant, working class in Queens, that we were treated differently and discriminated against because of how we looked, because of my accent, because of my parents are struggling with their English as they were learning the language. And I was one time really shocked when my 11-year-old brother was stopped and frisked by police in our neighborhood when he was walking back home. And though I was young and not really, being able to point out why was this happening, I just felt that there was something wrong with everything that was happening. And later on to really learn about systematic discrimination and racism and how we as an immigrant family, as people of color, were experiencing this in New York City. And my experience, it's uniquely in that on top of all of those layers, we live with the fear of deportation every day, which in this city after 9/11 just intensified. When we see police officers in the subway stations, and anyone could be stopped and asked about their immigration status. So I remember almost graduating from high school, just feeling even, fear of taking the train in the city where I grew up. So my story is not isolated from what millions of immigrant youth and immigrant families face. And as I started to meet other young people like myself that were going through the same experience, many of them had already lost family members to deportation. My friends were detained and put in deportation proceedings. And those moments really pushed me to think about, I need to do something. And United We Dream really came from that vision of wanting to bring young people together who had the lived experience of being young and immigrants and coming from poor communities. And we also come with a lot of different layers of trauma, of fleeing poverty and violent conflicts in many of the countries where we migrate from. So we envision United We Dream as a place where people like myself could move from fear to a place of empowerment. I used to actually, every time I share my story, I used to say that I was Sandra from Costa Rica. And that was my way to protect myself from being deported or that fear of being deported. But it was through United We Dream that bringing young people together to find our voice, share our stories, and take action, that we have been able to create change and even achieve things like DACA.
Thank you. Desmond?
So first of all, definitely want to express my gratitude for even being invited here. Audience look like it's a very beautiful audience that is eager to take things that we think is impossible and make it possible. And that's what FRRC, my organization, my story is all about, and they're all interconnected. As Executive Director of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, I don't know if some of you have ever heard of Amendment 4 in Florida, but we were the organization that led the effort that re-enfranchised over 1.4 million Floridians. And that's just but the tip of the iceberg of what we're actually doing, because I think it's much deeper than that. It's much deeper than, even the Amendment 4 win was much deeper than just re-enfranchising folks. It struck down the last remaining Jim Crow era law in the state of Florida that has been in place for over 150 years and allowed an alternative pathway for Americans to be able to vote again after they have completed their sentence. But the even more deeper aspect of this is understanding that in the work that FRRC does, and it's centered around people with felony convictions, the work is centered around our community, right? And so it's not just about improving the lives of people with felony convictions. It's really improving the status and the lives of people in our community, in our state, in our country. And we've seen little snippets of that with our Amendment 4 victory. Me personally, you know, I am a returning citizen. For those of you all who don't know what that term is, that's someone who's been previously convicted of a felony offense. I had a lot of them, y'all. I had a whole bunch of them, yes I did, because of my battle with substance abuse. And that battle actually led me to end up standing in front of railroad tracks in August of 2005, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. You know, that day I remember I was homeless, I was addicted to crack cocaine, I was unemployed, the only thing I owned were the clothes on my back, recently released from prison, and I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, or I didn't see any possibility that I didn't have any esteem anymore remaining, and I wanted to end it all. And the train fortunately did not come that day, and I ended up crossing those tracks and checking in the drug treatment. After completing that, a 4-month inpatient program, I moved in a homeless shelter. And this is about my third go-around in a homeless shelter. And while living in the homeless shelter, I decided to go to school. So I enrolled at the local community college. And I was scared that they were going to figure out who I was at some point and tell me that I had to leave. And so I dove into my studies, ended up graduating at the top of my class just in case they came to get me. I could at least say, listen, look what I've done. I know I'm not supposed to be here. You know, I know I have a record. I know I'm an addict, but look at what I've done. Give me an opportunity. And luckily, they didn't come to snatch me away. And I continued my education. I pursued a bachelor's degree in public safety management with a concentration in criminal justice. I figured since I had a lot of experience getting arrested and appearing before judges, that was going to translate into classroom success, and it did. And eventually I was accepted in the FIU College of Law, where in May of 2014, I did receive my Juris Doctorate degree. But I still can't practice law in the state of Florida because my civil rights have not been restored, even with the passage of Amendment 4, because what Amendment 4 did was just create a pathway so I am able to now vote. But back then, not only could I not practice law, I could not, my wife ran for office in 2016, I couldn't even vote for her. And then, of course, there's stories all over the state like that. But what was so, I guess, had me so captivated with doing the work, it was not, because listen, at the end of the day, when I was in prison, I was getting ready to come out. I wasn't, man, I can't wait to get out so I can go vote. No, I had real life issues that I had to deal with. And there was like this direct connection between poverty and criminalization, especially criminalization of black folks, especially that. And understanding that part of this actually was controlled by a narrative that told the world that I was no good and I didn't deserve redemption and I didn't deserve second chances and I didn't deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, that I would forever walk this earth with an F on my chest, right? And that is is the bigger picture of what FRRC is trying to shift, because I am someone's son and grandson and uncle and father and brother, you know? And so that is the work of FRRC, even though it's housed in the criminal justice reform / voting reform warehouse. But holistically, we know that there's a narrative that must be changed, and we have to approach this in such a way that not create more division and not create more labels, but rather bring us together along the lines of humanity.
That's right.
And uplift us all together.
That's right. Let me, that's right. You both touched on this a bit, but I want you to make explicit, how is the work on immigration issues or the work on reentry and criminal justice reform deeply interconnected with poverty? Because sometimes, people talk about lanes, right? And sometimes people will say, I work in education as a civil rights advocate. People will say, well, immigration, that's a separate lane. Anti-poverty, that's a separate lane. Housing, that's a separate lane. Tell me, how are these issues interconnected? Cristina?
For immigrant families and immigrant youth that we work with at United We Dream, these are young people that are going to low-performing schools who are being criminalized. Many of our members have been labeled as gang members because they wear a black T-shirt when they go to school. My brother, as I was sharing, was stopped and frisked. For us, the connection in which institutions and policies are treating particular groups of people differently, it's clear when, in the narrative and in the policy, the act of migrating and seeking safety or seeking a better life for your family is considered a crime under the law. My parents are considered criminals under the law for coming to seek a better life to this country. And when we have young people or family members who are driving, stopped, racially profiled, and then put in deportation proceedings, which, having the experience of being in a detention facility and put in deportation proceedings. So, I remember this month when we joined you in Florida for the Amendment 4 campaign, because our members, even though we don't have in United We Dream, many young people don't have the right to vote, and many families don't have the right to vote because they're immigrants. We understood very clearly that the fight for a voting restoration and policies that have criminalized black people are the same policies and systems that are criminalizing brown people and immigrants. And that if we were able to restore the rights of our black brothers and sisters in Florida, that was going to be a big win for all of us and a path to liberation for all of us. So, last in our Congress, which was in Florida, we mobilized over 1,000 young people that came to our convening for an entire Saturday of canvassing for Amendment 4 and talking to families and people in Florida about why we cared about this issue. So when we are talking about immigrant families and immigrant youth, we're talking about young people of color, families of color that face the same criminalization, the same issues around equal access and discrimination that we see in many communities of color. And we don't talk about this a lot, but the DACA program, which was a huge victory for us, the greatest victory that we've had in immigration policy in the last 30 years, that protected 800,000 young people from deportation, and after we pushed President Obama a lot to get there in 2012, it is one of the greatest out-of-poverty programs targeted to immigrant youth. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we worked to ensure that every single young person that could qualify could get their DACA, and these were all people living under the poverty line, in poor neighborhoods, in poor communities, young people of color who, after surveys that we've done, DACA meant in their lives that over 50% of them were able to get better jobs. Over 90% of them shared with us that they got a huge increase in their wages when they got DACA. 86% of them were able to access educational opportunities that they did not have before DACA. And it's not only the young person and like their path towards economic opportunity and educational opportunities. We're talking about families. DACA recipients, some of them are parents themselves. And in many of our households, DACA recipients are the only people that have papers, who are working, who are paying rent for their families, who are helping mom and dad with medical bills, or to work because their family members cannot work. So we're talking about a program that, even though sometimes we think of it, oh, that was immigration policy, it was actually an anti-poverty program and a program of economic empowerment for thousands of immigrant families.
Desmond?
All right, so I'm trying to figure out. So I really want to talk to you, but then the audience is so beautiful. I'd rather talk to the audience. Is that okay?
Please,
I want you to
that's right.
select
That's
it.
right.
So here's the deal, right? So I'm gonna talk about before, during, and after. All right. When you talk about how deep a role poverty plays in criminalization, right? So before, what we have are policies where, first of all, we know that there's over-policing in African-American communities. As a matter of fact, we just heard some videotape about one of your former mayors that's talking about we load up the police and push them in the African-American community. So it's no secret anymore, in case anyone was wondering. All right, so now you over-criminalize, over police, I should say, the African-American community, and you arrest me. When you arrest me, right, and this is before I'm even convicted of anything, right, sometimes I don't even have bail, or my bail is like extremely high. But I'm the breadwinner of the family, right? And my family is already, we're barely making ends meet, and all of a sudden you snatch the breadwinner out of the family. What is the family to do? So that's the before piece. So now we have high bail, or sometimes no bail at all, and people are made to languish in jails awaiting to have a chance to have their day in court. That's before. During, when they are incarcerated, then, so now I'm incarcerated, I want to call and check on my family. To make a 10-cent call costs my family $10. Right? A family that's already put under the gun, right, because they lost their major breadwinner, now they have to try to make up for that loss, and on top of that, still maintain contact with me because they can't come visit me because the Department of Corrections makes sure that they house me as far away as possible from my family. So all of these put more economic strains on the family. And then after I'm released, I can't get a job because I have a felony record. I'm restricted on the type of licenses I can get, and so all of that exasperates, right, the issue. But here's the catch. Y'all ready for this? You can't talk about the role of criminalization of black people and poverty without also including who benefits from that. Y'all with me now? Y'all with me? Okay. And so when just to tie it in, even to the work that we did around felon disenfranchisement, you got to remember that felon disenfranchisement was part of the black codes, right, that seen its appearance after the slaves were freed, right, and they began to exercise their rights by voting and actually putting former slaves in office, right, which created some anxiety, all right, and so these black codes, the most ingenious of them was felon disenfranchisement, because here's what it did. It criminalized things that would not normally be criminalized, all right? So now we got the broken window policy. I'm trying to do the parallels, right? It criminalized things that would not necessarily be criminalized and allowed law enforcement or the state, right, to now convict individuals and snatch away the right to vote. Right? That's the main thing they wanted, right? But when they snatched away the right to vote, now they were able to actually what? Incarcerate them. And once they incarcerated them, they were actually able to put them back out, outsource them back out into the fields that they was just liberated from. Think about that. And what we face today is no different. And so whenever you have that conversation about that interconnectivity, then you have to understand that it is coupled with some institution actually having a strategy to capitalize off of that, to gain profit off of that, to make a ton of money off of that. But they have to first desensitize folks to it. And that's another topic, but I definitely wanted to say definitely the before, during, and after, and how it really is connected to people actually gaining from the suffering of poor folks, from the suffering of minorities, especially of black folks. So we still suffering after all these centuries.
That's right. So both of you are involved in dismantling systems of oppression. You are in powerful rooms all the time. You both are leading powerful movements. But one of the things I admire most about the work that you're doing is that you're bringing to bear not only your personal experience, but you're lifting up the voices of people who have been directly impacted by the issues on which you are working. So talk to this room about how to do that, how to help those who are directly affected by a policy issue be heard. What do they have to do within their own organization? What skills and opportunities they have to create for folks?
I mean, I get started. I think that to me, it's like less about lifting up the voice of people. People have a voice. People have a story. What we do and what I feel is our responsibility, as many of us here share a same vision, for this country, is to empower folks with the tools that they have, with the platforms that they need to be able to not only share their story, but to take action, to lead their campaigns, to lead their organizations, to lead their communities, to run for office, to run the programs. And this is, to me, one of the biggest lessons about community organizing, but also the work that we do at United We Dream. We had not won DACA if we had not had young people who lived the experience of being undocumented and felt the pain of it every day, being the ones that developed the strategy, being the ones that made our t-shirts, being the ones that were talking to the media, being the one meeting with policymakers, because there's nothing like the urgency that we have when we are living through these experiences. And so the biggest lesson for us, even when we look at our victories, is that people who are closest to the pain are the closest to the solutions. And if it had not been for young people like us who came together to imagine the bold idea that the president could stop deporting young people, that we can dismantle the ICE system, the enforcement system that is criminalizing, that is targeting our communities, we will not even be talking about that in the narrative. So what does it take to do that in our organizations? I will say it's not easy, but it is also the only way that we're gonna win. And the reason why I know that is because I see this time after time in the campaigns that we lead. DACA is one example, but we were able to also push, powerful sheriffs and policymakers in localities to say, we're not gonna collaborate with ICE. We're not gonna put people into the deportation pipeline in localities. We're creating changes in universities and in schools so that students can feel safe and be welcome, especially under the current political moment that we're in, when immigrant communities are being hyper-attacked. And what it takes for us is that it's not just about, tokenizing someone to share their story. It's not about just, using it for the photo op that we need. It is actually saying, here are the tools. What is your vision? And what do you need to get there? So at United We Dream, we are proud that over 90% of our staff come from the community, are immigrants themselves with the undocumented experience. And many of them, haven't been able to go to school. Many of them have not been able to finish college. Why? Because also our communities don't have access to resources. School continues to get more and more expensive, and for poor families, it's not even an opportunity, really, to be able to pursue higher education. Even worse when you are undocumented. So we have an entire system of training, of coaching, and of spaces where it's really about our staff and our leaders being the ones that develop from the t-shirt the video that you see on Facebook to the strategies that we're dealing with in Congress or local offices. So it's not easy and it takes time. And for me, as the executive director, is actually taking intentional time to, in my budget, have an entire training and capacity building section of our budget that goes to develop the skills and the empowerment of our staff and also of our leaders.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Desmond.
So, how many in the audience are directly impacted? Say you have a felony record. Raise your hand. All right. How many people are undocumented? Raise your hand. Okay, good. So I think I might be talking to a slightly different audience. So I'm not going to tell you about what I would tell people who are directly impacted, how they could be empowered, right? What I'm going to do is talk to you all about how you can create that environment and that space so people like me, let me tell you something. Think about it. Last year I was named Time Magazine 100 most influential person in the world, right? And I remember when I was telling my wife, I was like, is that the United States? She was like, no, baby, the world. And my response to her was, there's more than 100 countries in the world, right? And I wish they would have put my picture on the front page of Time. If you anybody know Time, you need to get on them about that because they needed, I felt my picture should have been there because it was an example to everyone that we all have an opportunity to be great. Right? That you don't have to be a movie star. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be the most handsome person in the world. All you have to be is have a desire to serve, right? And have an environment that helps you become a better person, right? And so what I want to talk to you all about in my couple of minutes is how do we create that, right? How do we create? Well, first of all, we have to understand something, right? It's the person that's experiencing the pain that is most invested in ending that pain as quickly and permanently as possible, right? I'm driving down the street with my wife and my wife tells me she's hungry. What I've learned is when she says she's hungry, that don't mean I get to take my time to try to figure out what restaurant I want to take her across town. What that means is I pull over as soon as possible and get her what she wants to eat because she's experiencing the hunger, not me. No matter how much I love her. So no matter how much you believe that you are committed to these causes and you're down like 4 flat tires to ride with us, you have to understand you don't have that pain that we have. And so you have, the role that you can play is bring your level of expertise, bring your world of support through funding or other kind of ways of support to bolster, right, the work that we're doing and create that environment that allows us to do the most important thing. And you know what that is? To fail. There is no great masterpiece out there that you see, no matter what genre form, where a masterpiece where the artist did not color outside the lines, where the artist was not creative and courageous enough to do something different. Something that has not been done before, right? And what needs to happen in order for that to occur is the freedom to know that if I fail, it's not over, right? That you cannot hold me to the same, well, actually, to be honest, maybe you could hold me to the standards of maybe even my white counterparts because they lose all the time and you still invest in them, right? So hold me to that standard then, right? Hold me to that standard, but don't have me operating with the spirit of fear, knowing that, man, if I don't get this right, I'm not going to get the funding, I'm not going to get the support, people are going to put me on the back burner, and something new is going to come along or whatever, and it limits us. But when we empower the people who are directly impacted and give them that room, they will amaze you. They will amaze themselves. And in doing so, they're going to transform our world, not their world. It's not their world, it's not my world. It's our world that we're supposed to be working on improving. When you're talking about battling these systems of oppression, right? It's not just about people with felony convictions. But we're the ones. If those of you, any of you all are people of faith, you know, you would know that God or Yahweh or Jehovah always uses the least among a group of people to bring about the biggest change. Know your role. Know your role. What role do you play in it? Right? And so we empower the Davids. You know what I'm saying? We empower, I can't even think of the name right now, but it's coming, Esther's. We empower them. And they will lead us, right? They will lead us. And so that's what, you know, if anything I want to leave with you is that, listen, each and every one of you have the power to transform this country, right? And it's not necessarily by you actually doing the work that transforms, but you creating that space for that person that's experiencing the pain to relieve themselves of that oppression.
That's right. So we started the day this morning with some truly depressing and frightening data about the threats to the American dream. And I bet everyone in here was looking for a reason to be hopeful. Thank you, Cristina and Desmond. You give us a reason to be hopeful. Thank you so much. Thank you.